Worried about, and I brought it up. I actually brought it up in a video a couple of days ago. And as per the usual, when I talk about something that's going on with the federal government and it's new and people aren't used to it, and some of the people in the comments just go rampant. They go rabid with their comments. Just, how dare you? How could you say this? Blah, 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 blah. But the reality is this: once those people get used to the idea of A, what I stated was correct, B, that it might happen, C, it's more likely to happen if these things occur. Once you're more educated about it, what we're calling the literacy of Social Security benefits and things like that, what the SSA is going to do, what kind of problems it faces, what will happen in the future, then all of a sudden people start to come together and say, okay, our politicians need to change. We need to have a different model going forward. And that's all I'm shooting for with these videos, with updates on news, so that you're aware of what's going on, so that you in the future will vote for your best interest, which is weird to say that, because, you would think that people automatically would be voting for their best interest, but they don't. It's weird. Guys, so CNBC came out with an article. As the U.S. hits debt ceiling, here's what it could mean for Social Security and Medicare. Lori Kanosh, who does pretty much all the CNBC stuff for Social Security Administration-based benefits, did the article January 19th. Let's just go through the basics here real quick so you understand what's happening. Thursday, January 9th, U.S. outstanding debt hit its statutory limit. She puts in a cute little definition. I'm going to read it because I think it'd be helpful to people. The debt limit or ceiling, the debt ceiling, right? So these are the same thing. Debt limit, debt ceiling, same thing. Is the total amount of money, lots of cash, right? The U.S. can borrow. I have lots of cash, but I need more cash. Let me borrow cash, right? To meet its legal obligations to pay for stuff we already agreed to pay for, including Social Security and Medicare benefits, right? You guys know what those are, as well as military salaries, tax refunds, interest on the national debt, and other payments. Okay. In a Jan 13 letter, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Chuck Schumer, other congressional leaders, blah, 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 of the possible irreparable harm that could come to the U.S. economy, Americans' livelihoods, and global financial stability if the problem goes unresolved. You never see end of life terms like this being used by government officials. You just never see it, because usually the presidents step in and they try and, squelch that agency from freaking out, because, if an agency's freaking out and there's a major problem, then it looks bad on that president, right? So that means his house, his shop, his legacy is filled with a problem that they're not fixing. So it's odd as that. I expected that basically President Biden would have stepped in and said, Janet Yellen, simmer down. But that's not happening here, it's interesting. So remember, this could all be a ploy on behalf of Republicans and Democrats to get more out of the American people. Never sell that down the river, because if you look at the math, Americans are getting between 40 to 50% less of their benefits that they're supposed to from Social Security just from 2000 to the current date. So this could all be a ploy to just make us work more and get less. All right. I respectfully urge Congress, this is her letter, to act promptly to protect the full faith and credit of the United States. She means the financial faith and credit that we can pay our bills on time. On Thursday, the U.S. began taking extraordinary measures. You just never hear that kind of terminology from government officials at the executive level. To avoid defaulting on its obligations, the Treasury Department cannot provide an estimate of how long the government can expect to pay the government's obligations, blah, 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 blah. They're saying somewhere around May, the tricks are going to run out to move money from here to here, take, from Paul, pay Peter, all that stuff. but they're saying June, like early June, that's when the game show stops. Like we won't be able to, that's when we won't be able to pay our debts, and basically our bonds market will just crash, which will really suck because that will massively F over the Social Security Administration benefits like retirement, SSDI benefits, Medicare. Because with these, they put them into these special bonds, and these special bonds are going to dive if they don't fix this problem. Negotiations over the federal debt ceiling mark one of the first big challenges the new Congress will face. McCarthy has agreed to tie lifting the debt ceiling to spending cuts. So what's happening is the Republicans are, and remember, McCarthy is not a hardliner Republican. He's like a midi kind of like, if you're looking at attack and defense, he's a midi Republican, right? So kind of the point here is what we're seeing is that they're trying to balance the budget. And it's really weird too, because when you think, like, if you just boil it down to what it is, like if you take all this stuff and all this stuff and you put it and you just focus on what it is, we're not in the weeds, we're on the path.
This mistake is costing Amazon Prime shoppers big. Are you still using Prime? Because at this point, it's the dinosaur of online shopping. What if
It's weird that in order for us as a country, right, to essentially fund this company, the federal government, without it spending too much, we have to have this weird group of people called the Republicans to raise their flag triumphantly, to go ahead and say, enough is enough. We must balance the budget. Like, what's weird is, like, how the hell are the Democrats not doing this as well? Yeah. Like, the Democrats are just like, let's just keep running up the tab. Let's order more dessert, right? And the Republicans are like, no, we have to balance the budget. This is the right thing to do. But using Social Security benefits to do it is the dumbest thing that could be done. Like, literally, when I look back at like what Republicans are doing here, and I'm just like, look, okay, Republicans are right. We need to balance the budget. We got it, or else the whole thing's going to collapse, right? Because we're just going to keep spending and the whole thing's going to collapse. Republicans are right on that. But then when I look at what they're like, hey, you know what? We could reduce spending on this military thing, foreign nations. We could do all of that. Or what we could do, stick with me here, what we could do, we could I'm just gonna, hey, here, just spitballing here with an idea. Let's riff one out. Here we go. What we could do is we could make Social Security benefits, something people have already paid for, shittier than what it already is. Even though there's a shittier problem right now with people learning the statistics about how they're getting screwed over for money they paid in from decades ago. Like, when you put it that way, you have to look at the Republicans and go, oh, wow, you're on the right track, but you might be an idiot because you're doing it the wrong way. That's what we're looking at. Now, the Democrats in this whole situation are far, far worse. They're literally, Biden is in such belief. President Biden is in such belief that they should just keep spending, that he doesn't even care what the Republicans think. He doesn't. He's like, the moderate middle ground Republicans are going to come join us. We're just going to raise it, raise the debt limit, raise the ceiling, raise the roof, and keep spending. But, that's delusional. But, that hasn't been, as of word, very off from the strategic way that they've handled things as the, Joseph Biden White House. That's not inaccurate. That's one of the things I like to do sometimes. I like to think theoretically about what's happening, why we're going through this, right? And then I like to ask myself, is this uncommon for this situation because of the people that are handling it? Right? Because that's when you look at great leadership, you got to look at great leadership. You got to ask yourself, hey, okay, does this make sense for the people that are running it? If you put a bunch of idiots in charge of everything, do you end up with brilliant things? Usually not. If you put a bunch of idiots in charge of things, do you usually end up with, poor results? Yeah, sure. If you put people in charge of it that are very greedy, you end up with what we have right now. That's exactly what we end up with. Okay. All right, so let's keep reading through this thing. So Social Security and Medicare are worried that lawmakers will try to amend those programs. Okay, we're looking at as early as June for a train wreck on this issue, said Dan Adcock, Director of Government Relations and Policy at the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. He wrote a really cool article where he said millennials are going to be relying on Social Security benefits even more than retired people currently. And they're saying, like, a person in the modern America model will earn, over their lifespan around $1 million, a couple around $2 million. So what's interesting is that, this is the money with inflation being out of control. Thanks for the soft landing. I'll make sure I have to get new wheels, new tires, new airframe. But, what they're saying is, bottom line is, we people, my millennial folk, will end up having to rely on this program much more than people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. Which is not good because they keep making the Social Security Administration weaker, less incredible. The benefits are not as good. So, if we're going to rely on it more, would you not try to obtain our votes by, I don't know, doing a better job of managing things so that the program was actually getting better and not worse? It's a theory. It's something that would de facto get you more votes, but hey.
Less than $70 for 4 phone lines? It's possible with
politics. Eats the little people. The consequences, this is her quote, the consequences are dire because default would not only disrupt Social Security and Medicare benefits, but also cause a global economic recession or worse. I don't know why they don't use the word depression. I mean, it's not that hard to just say what it is. Like the Great Recession is the dumbest thing you can. It's a depression. It's the Great Recession. Come on, you know what I mean? That's one of the things that I really don't like about politics is that they don't call it what it is. And if they would just call it what it is, more people would be on board to fix it. But they're so afraid that the reputation. Look, if we had political leaders that handle things like great Americans handle things, where they face it right on, call it what it is, and then fix it, we'd fix our problems. But that doesn't happen in politics. In politics, you've got a bunch of government employees who are afraid to be pinned with the screw up and then get fired and lose their benefits. That's America. Health benefit payments could be delayed. All right, it's super late. I know it's 3:07 a.m. and we have work at essentially 8 a.m. Monday morning. Here we go. If the U.S. were to default on its debt, it would be unprecedented. Again, big words, big scary words. The big question is whether the Treasury Department would be able to prioritize what does and does not get paid if that occurs. Unlike a government shutdown where Social Security and Medicare benefits continue to flow, right? So if you're thinking they're just going to stop, no, they'll continue to flow. That may not be the case with the default, according to Adcock. Remember, he's the Dan Adcock, director of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. There's a good chance, his quote, that benefits for retirees and people with disabilities and survivors will be disrupted, he said. Even a short delay could interfere with beneficiaries' ability to pay for health care, food, rent, utilities, or other necessary expenses. Okay. The Treasury Department may be able to prioritize some payments, and that would include Social Security, said Jason Fichtner, chief economist at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who previously served in several senior roles at the Social Security Administration. However, the Social Security Administration may delay payments to ensure it has enough cash on hand, he said. Let me read that to you again. Okay, this is direct. This is from people that used to work at the SSA, who basically now are doing like the nonprofit thing / what's the public policy? Where is it going? Let me read that to you again because it's important. However, the Social Security Administration may delay payments to ensure it has enough cash on hand. Now, financial literacy thing. Sometimes a company, which is what all these agencies are, you have the federal government, and then you have the little baby companies that are part of the federal government, right? It's like the Social Security Administration, all of these different agencies, departments, etc. They're like little baby companies under the big umbrella of the mama company, the federal company. All right. What they're saying is that there's a difference here between, having the potential credit to pay it, and having the cash on hand, it goes to you. And what they're saying is that they might have a cash on hand problem if they're not able to continue the funding, and it might be an administration of the funds, like the people aren't there to press the button to make it pay out. It might be a situation where, essentially there's some funding problem where you see there's a scandal where, funds are supposed to be there and they're not. Never underestimate the capacity of when it rains to pour, I'll continue the article. Meanwhile, Medicare payments may fluctuate, while other areas like federal employee salaries and food benefits through SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what everybody knows is food stamps, may stop. Let me read that to you again so that, and remember, I'm not just making this up. This is like from the people who looked at the numbers, did an analysis, reported it through the nonprofits that study this stuff, and then CNBC basically reported on that. Let me read it to you again. Meanwhile, Medicare payments may fluctuate, while other areas like federal employee salaries and food benefits, right, may stop. The process may be politically messy. Social Security, and this is what Fitchner said, Social Security, I'm sure, will get paid. Interest on the debt will get paid, he said. After that, flip a coin who gets paid. So what he's saying, guy that used to work for the SSA, executive positions, and now is out of that private market into the public market of work. What he's saying is he thinks Social Security benefits will be paid out as a priority, as a stage one priority.
Best Buy Total Tech, a membership that brings you peace of mind and complete confidence when it comes to all things tech.
Other programs, food stamps, Medicare, retirement plans set up through, the government that, federal employees could pay into. What he's saying is that those programs are on the chopping block. So to understand what that means, what he's saying is that he thinks Social Security benefits will be made a priority. I do too. I don't think it'll be made a priority for the same reason you probably do. I think it'll be made a priority just because of the political reasoning behind it. If Biden starts chopping Social Security benefits, reducing them, not paying them out on time, he will never get a second term. I can promise you that. I can definitively promise you, if Social Security benefits through this whole situation, whether it's caused by the Republicans or the Democrats in their negotiations, if Social Security benefits are essentially slowed down, not cut off, slowed down, he will never see a second term. I can promise you that. Definitively, I can promise you that. There's no way physically that man could win a second term if people are not getting paid their Social Security benefits. Okay? So why some worry about Social Security benefit cuts? Right from the article is House Republicans plan to focus on curbing government spending. Some worry that that could entail cuts to Social Security benefits and Medicare in exchange for votes to increase or suspend the limit. So Republicans right now are doing one of the dumbest things they've done in, past 25, 30 years, which is that in order for them to make the budget work, they have to F over the people who paid into the government to survive in their elderly years or when they become disabled. Is that unethical? Well, there's many levels of hell, I'm told, and that's a pretty low one. So, I'd give it a high tomato score on unethical. I would. Among the ideas Republicans have pitched include raising Social Security's full retirement age to 70. They should be lowering it back down to 65 since we're the richest effing country on earth. Changing the way benefits annual cost of living adjustments are measured to make them less generous. I thought we were trying to switch from the CPI-W to the CPI-E since the reports have come out that we've lost 40 to 50% of our benefits from 2000 to essentially 2022. That's right. You receive of your benefits around 40 to 50% less than you should just from 2000 forward. Yeah, amazing. It's frightening how inept our government actually is, or making it so benefits are means tested through the middle class. I mean, if you were to come up with the dumbest ideas that you potentially could and make a list of them, They have done that. The Republicans have achieved that list. It's not good. It's not good because punishing the American people for overspending, what the Democrats are doing, and then trying to be the savior of that by curbing the spending, what the Republicans are trying to do, by forcing the American citizens who pay for everything to begin with to suffer. I mean, when you put it that way, how the hell did we vote for these idiots? Like, where did we make the mistake? Because like when you sit back, you got to be like, okay, well, obviously these politicians need to be fired and then exported out of the United States, right? that's realistically what should be done, but nobody's got the cojones to actually say that. But bottom line is, they should be fired. They should be fired, and exported outside of the United States. All right. So, moreover, they could raise the Medicare. I use the word export because I think it's cuter. Moreover, they could raise the Medicare eligibility age to 67 from 65, he said. Again, another one that goes on the list of stupid shit the Republicans are coming out with right now. To make those changes, there would need to be enough support in the Senate with 60 votes, which they're not going to get. That's a pretty high threshold, blah, blah, blah. All right. So you guys know that in order to change the SSA law, you need 60 votes, which, they're not going to have. All right. The White House has also, from the article, indicated it is not willing to negotiate. As President Biden has made clear, Congress must deal with the debt limit and must do so without conditions. Like, it's either raise the limit or we fail as a country. So what we would call these people are, and I don't want to be mean about it, but when it comes to like captains of a ship, you know what I mean? This is the kind of captain that has no wiggle room. Like in every like ancient proverb, an ancient like thing that you must learn to be a great person, right? Where you must learn how to wiggle through the storm and, understand the gray room, right? In America, we don't do that. We don't do that. So President Biden has made it clear that he's not going to find middle ground. He's not going to find ways to make this work for people that have been elected by us. He's just going to say and demand and push through what he thinks will go through. And so the reality is, instead of the president coming out like a leader does and saying, okay, I understand what you want. I understand what you want. What about these potential options? Instead of him being a leader, what we've got is a toddler shaking his hands and his feet and his butt at the camera. That's what we have. For Social Security reform to progress successfully, both parties would need to come to the table and be willing to make concessions. Well, my question to you guys is, why is SSA stuff even on the table? Well, we got to keep funding Ukraine. We got to keep funding Ukraine. Look, fine, send Ukraine money. But, you could go ahead with all these countries and renegotiate how much we pay to them. Trump did that, and everybody lost their friggin' mind, which was weird because, I don't know why you're all okay with sending so much money to foreign places that we have nothing to do with. I just, other than setting up a base and then pretending to be Earth's superpower. We're doing a crap job of being Superman right now. I got to tell you. All right. With a quote from the article, with Social Security, you're going to have a grand bargain that includes changes to the benefit formula and revenue increases. And that's just not something that they can get done in a debt crisis environment. All right. That's the article. That's the point. You guys see now how when push comes to shove, when they measure great people and they're like, don't measure them by the good times, measure them by the bad times. Like, what they do in the bad times. Just to clarify, our politicians in the bad times are the screaming idiot who basically is making people focus on the wrong thing, which is, how do we deal with this? It's the person that runs around, locks the doors, and lets everybody burn inside. That's what our politicians are at this point. So, but anyways, guys, I will catch you in the next video. I think the next video is a fun, interesting one because I kind of flip what this article Politico is about, specifically about, essentially how the GOP is looking at this and how Trump would deal with it.
$999. And it's not only not a bad deal for the CPU on its own, but it's a reflection of an increasingly favorable CPU market for buyers. That is, if you're willing to get your hands a little bit dirty digging through the archives of CPU history, and if you're willing to take some risks. Like the risk I take of you skipping this message from our sponsor, Seasonic. Never skimp on getting a quality power supply for your current or your next computer build. Check out Seasonic and their wattage calculator at the link in the video description. Intel's first generation Xeon Scalable CPUs launched on July 11th, 2017, and the reception to them was lukewarm, largely because AMD also launched their first generation EPYC server CPUs.
So whoever's in the room, you gonna talk to me or what? You've been here for a little bit. Guess not.
Around the same time. See, the problem for Intel was for nearly $5,000 less, you could buy a CPU from AMD with more threads and more cache if you were willing to overlook some of the growing pains that came with it being an all-new platform. So AMD's return to competitiveness could be part of the reason that we were able to get this CPU for just 12% of its retail price 4 years later. But it's definitely not the whole picture. Those of you who follow closely the secondary market may know this already, but for the uninitiated, there's kind of a pattern to the availability of cheap, powerful hardware like this. You see, many data center and enterprise customers upgrade their hardware on a schedule. This helps them stay more secure by ensuring that their servers will be actively supported and patched by the manufacturer. And it also allows them to take advantage of the better efficiency of more modern processors. Well, that retired hardware has to go somewhere. So instead of just e-wasting it, a small amount might be given to employees to validate and use personally, while the majority will go to refurb server sites like bargainhardware.co.uk or more general auction sites like eBay. Because even though it's older gear, it's absolutely still useful and can be cumulatively worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. And these sales are great news for enthusiasts because even a single large data center dumping a bunch of CPUs onto eBay can have a profound effect, not just on the models that they're selling, but the used CPU market as a whole. So let's take a closer look at our chip. On the surface, I would say there is absolutely nothing out of the ordinary about it. And in fact, if you had told me when it arrived that it was brand new, I would probably have believed you. But this isn't quite an ordinary chip, and that is why it is so cheap. If you look closely at the listings for this kind of server gear, you're going to see that they fall under 3 general classes. Let's start with the most expensive. Chips listed as retail were validated by Intel for end-user delivery and then probably sold in fully built systems for large customers. They are going to perform exactly as a brand new processor of the same specifications. Other than that, you are very unlikely to get any form of warranty support. Now, those chips are still going for less than their original price, around $1,800 to $2,000. But given that you could buy a Threadripper 3970X with more, not to mention faster cores for that kind of money, I wouldn't recommend it. Now for the cheapest. Haha, this guy. This is an engineering sample Xeon Platinum 8176. We happen to have this one lying around. It's got 28 cores, just like the retail one, but you can buy one of these for under $200. Wow! Notice how it says Intel Confidential on it? This is because this chip was intended to be used by engineers to develop their own accompanying products. So Dell or Micron might get large batches of these prior to the official launch as they work to make compatible motherboards and compatible memory and all that kind of stuff, which leads us to a couple of small problems with ES chips like this one. First, is performance. You know how the rumors about upcoming CPUs often get the clock speeds wrong? Well, that's because Intel is actually changing the clock speeds based on what they learn as they ramp up production. So early chips can run at sometimes drastically lower clock speeds. Another big one is compatibility. Remember how I mentioned Intel sends these out before the product launch? Well, If they're not done designing the product yet, depending on how early the sample was, it's possible that it won't even boot in a normal retail motherboard. This $169 Xeon, nice, for example, only works in a specific subset of HP ProLiant servers. And then some of the $400 to $500 versions are only supported by some Supermicro boards and some HP boards. So can we still get a good deal here? Yes, that is where our original chip, the one that cost us $999, comes in. This is a qualifying sample, and in most cases, a QS is just a regular production Xeon Platinum 8176 that reports in software as an engineering sample. It's sus like that. Ours, for example, has an identical stepping to a regular retail chip, meaning that everything from compatibility all the way to performance should be exactly identical to a retail chip. Though, of course, there is only one way for us to find out. First, we should put it in the socket correctly. Big boy chip. We're going to go with the Threadripper application method. Draw the little X on there. Now, because functionally the CPU should be no different from a retail chip, we should be able to use it on any C621 platform motherboard. These boards can be had for as cheap as $200 if you're lucky, but they can be significantly more expensive, going as high as around $500. But even at $1,500 for our CPU and motherboard, we could still be in pretty good shape here if it performs. One thing you might have a little bit of trouble with, though, is finding a compatible cooler that's not kind of stupid. There's two different ILMs, or hole patterns. So there's a narrow one and a square one. You can see the board that we have. You see this is a square ILM because the socket is more square. If you had a narrow ILM, it would be more narrow. Hey, there we go. All right, chips showing up, all that good stuff. We've got our 96 gigs of memory. This is a 6-channel memory controller. Something the writer brought up that didn't even occur to me is that it uses like a non-user-friendly style, non-graphical BIOS. I was like, just a BIOS, you mean? But yeah, it occurred to me that you young whippersnapper kids might not be familiar with navigating those. As for can it game, the answer is a resounding yes, sirree, Bob. We're running at anywhere from 100 to 120 FPS in Doom Eternal. Oh, wait, what the crap? Why would it default to this? How is this game so bad at just running at your native resolution? Okay, so running at native res, the answer changes somewhat. That's unfortunate. We are dipping down as low as 40 frames per second on this puppy. Is the CPU cooling like working? One moment, please. These things don't actually run that hot, which is kind of crazy when you consider they've got 28 flipping cores in them. Yeah, well, there's your answer, David. How many cores this game is using? The answer appears to be a big fat, I don't know, a couple of them. Look at the frame rates. They're all over the place. Like, okay, yeah, we're at 100 and whatever, but then, oh man, look at it just tank. We're at 40. Okay, so not a great gaming experience for $1,000. There's your problem. While we're getting cores boosting up to 3.1, even as high as 3.5 gigahertz, that's plenty for modern gaming. The cores on average are running anywhere from 1 to 1.1 gigahertz, which tells us that this particular game anyway is jumping from one core to the next, which might explain why it's running really well for a bit and then choking on its own vomit in the next moment. What we can maybe do is pin a handful of cores to this process and see if that helps. That's a big fat no. Oh. As soon as I have to look at anything in the distance, it's not the GPU though, because it's not about what the GPU has to render. It's about what the CPU has to, because it must just be a draw call thing then, which in Vulkan is theoretically like really well optimized for that. But as soon as it needs more draw calls, as soon as we go off into the distance over here, and it has to be like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of stuff over there. It's like, bleh. Oh, interesting. We're up to like 150, 200 now. What the heck is going on here? Why is our FPS gradually climbing? It's really choppy though. This frame counter here is not representative of the smoothness of this gaming experience. Like you can see it probably, David, right? So yeah, we're running well in excess of 200 FPS and it smooths out sometimes. This must be just kind of the same issue here. What a bad gaming CPU. And not only is it bad for gaming, but if you needed to do, say, 3D work or high-resolution video editing in Premiere, the CPU wouldn't be ideal for that either. That's because many 3D engines greatly favor GPU rendering thanks to GPU's vastly superior performance in parallel applications. Also, programs like Premiere tend to disproportionately favor single-core performance versus having as many threads as you can cram into a socket. That's not to say that a many-core CPU like a 5950X is a bad idea for Premiere. It's just that the 5950X also has strong single-core performance, and this one just doesn't. Where you might see some benefit would be in anything that involves complex parallel computing. So maybe you want a personal server that can do everything, like host a few Minecraft servers and some websites and act as a media server and do all of it simultaneously. Well, now we're talking. Even then, you can also get a lot of other CPUs for around the same price or less that can perform those functions. Take, for example, the Xeon E5 2670 V2. With a board and cooling, you can get a pair of those for around $250. That's 20 cores and 40 threads, and definitely all that you need for some home automation and NAS and media transcoding duty, though it does come at the cost of higher power consumption. And check out our sponsor, Micro Center. You can get the best prices and selection at any one of Micro Center's 25 locations across the United States. If you use the Micro Center Custom PC Builder, you can spec out the best PC at any price point. All in all, neat chip, but not nearly as big a find as our $400 Extreme Editions, which, by the way,
Hello? It says there's two people in here. Are you going to talk to me? Hello? I don't see the purpose of coming in and just watching somebody and not co-create with them. It doesn't make much sense to me, but whatever yanks your chain. So you're just gonna sit there and not do nothing or say nothing, huh? Watch nothing? That doesn't make any sense. Wow. Huh. Holy shit. Damn. I don't think I could win this. Um, huh. Huh. What? That's bullshit. Oh, now it goes. Huh. Are you guys just gonna sit here and not say nothing? It really doesn't make any sense. fuck? Well, it don't make much sense, but whatever.
TI, what do we know about it? Well, Copite7 Kimmy, our favorite Twitter leaker, has updated his December 13th post with a reply, basically not changing any of the stats we saw other than the power draw and adjusting it to a 160 watt target on the RTX 4060 Ti. Now, the overall specs here, I think, are interesting, especially when you compare them to other cards in the current 4000 series that we have, as well as the previous 3060 Ti. A Video Cards article on this topic does have a helpful little chart over here. Get out of the way for you. And so here's the rumors. Now, let's be clear. These are rumored specs on the 4070 and 4060 Ti. These are not at all confirmed by NVIDIA. NVIDIA has not even confirmed these cards will come out. All we have for sure are the 4070 Ti and the 3060 Ti. But if we now go with what the rumors are stating the specs will be, the 4060 Ti is rumored to be on the 8106 GPU. Remember, the 3060 Ti was on GA104. So, you know, if you look at the die type comparison between the generations, it's looking like it'll be a step down. It also looks like the 4060 Ti is rumored to have fewer CUDA cores than the 3060 Ti. Now, that being said, just comparing CUDA cores across generations does not mean that means the 4060 Ti would perform worse than a 3060 Ti. I just think it's an interesting stat. For one thing, we know that the 4000 series from NVIDIA is able to clock much, much higher than the 3000 series. So even if you had fewer cores, even if the cores perform the same, that doesn't mean having fewer of them means you will perform worse. But it looks like, again, the rumors are pointing to still be at 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 rather than 6X. And then on a 128-bit bus rather than the 256-bit bus from the 3060 Ti, giving it a much lower total memory bandwidth. But the power target is down to 160 watts compared to the 200 watt on the 3060 Ti. So at least that's interesting. Now, when are we expecting these? Again, the rumored production time frame has been February, March, but that's when it enters production, and then it would take weeks or even a couple of months to actually enter the market. So we could still be waiting a while here, and these are still the rumored 4070 specs. So that's where we're at there. Okay, sorry, people who hate leaks and rumors. Let's move along. So this hasn't been in the news for a while, but it's just hitting the Reddit threads and all that again. With the 12VH power cable from NVIDIA, which we'd seen a bunch of news about it, those melting when these first came out. There was a bunch of research done. NVIDIA themselves agreed with the independent research from places like Gamers Nexus, saying that it's just not fully seating the cable, which doesn't excuse a cable design that makes it very easy to not seat properly. But then Cable Mod's custom cables were reported to maybe be better at some of that stuff and not have the some of the poor design defects, but still they have to use in the end that connector. And we are getting a report of one of the Cable Mod's custom cables also having the melting issue, although the card itself was not damaged. And in the Reddit thread, in response, the company did jump in and say that we're very sorry about that. Please reach out to our support and we will make it right with you. Our products come with service and we help every customer out. They say the card is not damaged. They spoke to him, but in case our cables would damage a card, then we would replace the GPU. We have done that in the past in very rare cases where our cables damage something. So if you see this, you're like, I'm not going to touch any of those Cable Mod cables or something like that. Just be aware that while the user on Reddit does claim that they fully seated the cable until there was a click, just keep in mind that that has been the main issue. It's possible he made a mistake and did not. And Cable Mods does stand behind their product and say that if it was their fault, they would help replace the GPU if it actually did damage the GPU. So interesting stuff. Now, how are the new cards actually selling for AMD and NVIDIA? Well, it's pretty much impossible to get an accurate count from across the entire world. But this WCCF Tech article is reporting on the sales at Germany's largest retailer, which is MindFactory. And MindFactory, one of the interesting things is that they actually make public their sales figures. And so, for example, in this recent tweet, they're posting the GPU sales by volume, and they saw the 4070 Ti for that week at 280, the RTX 3060 at 255, the 6700 XT at 180, the 6600 at 130, 7900 XTX entering the chart here at 120, 6800 at 110, and so on and so forth. Now, this WCCF Tech article has gone through and looks like totaled up some individual sales for each graphic card at MindFactory beyond this tweet for where they were at this week, and getting us some more total units sold from MindFactory. So again, this is not representative of the entire market, but I thought it was still some interesting stats. We see the 4090 at a little over 1,500 units sold, the 4080 at a little over 1,600, the 4070 Ti at over 1,700. So even though it came out later, it looks like the 4070 Ti has surpassed the 4080 and 90 in total sales. The 7900 XTX at 1170 and the 7900 XT, so the non-X variant, at over 1800, which actually does surpass any of those other previous models. Now, this WCCF Tech article mentions that, in their opinion, the German market is more open to AMD graphics cards than some other parts of the world. So this might not be indicative of, worldwide total sales and market share and all of that. I can't comment on the German feelings. Maybe your German can let me know in the comment section. The other thing I would mention, though, is just like, I think it's also how many they've been shipped and at what prices, right? Because you can only sell the cards that you have available. So, if you got shipped a whole bunch more XTs than you got shipped XTXs, for example, or if you've been shipped more 4070 Ti's than you've been shipped 4090s, I think that could also have something to do with the total sales numbers. So we shouldn't read too much into any of that, but I thought it was interesting.
Courtney is deep in a Practicum Tech bootcamp, becoming a software engineer. She's wanted to switch to tech for a while, but didn't think she had the background or the time to learn.
Now, we're starting to see the new NVIDIA laptops getting some comparisons. Unfortunately, it's still under embargo for exactly when we can get full information on these. Reports are showing that RTX 4090 and 4080 laptop pre-orders might be able to begin on February 1st, although that is not officially confirmed by NVIDIA. It looks like this is coming from IT Home originally, and I'm finding this in a WCCF Tech article reporting on that. So even if that date is off, it looks like at least some tech outlets like Jared's Tech, who I believe does have a bit more of a laptop focus than a lot of the other tech channels, has been given some of the new laptops. Now, in these Razer laptops, he was able to test them out, but is limited by embargo on exactly what kind of information he's able to share. So unfortunately, it looks like mostly DLSS 3 versus DLSS 2 performance numbers in gaming, which, I mean, that's kind of pointless, guys. We know DLSS 3 can increase the number of frames by generating them with some downsides. It doesn't help the input latency. It doesn't, sometimes there can be image quality issues. And overall, I think it's a good feature. But what I mainly hate about DLSS 3 is using it in bar graphs like these. And I'm not blaming Jared's tech. I believe he's limited by a review embargo on what sort of information is allowed to be shared. Now, what I did think was a little more interesting was Blender results and DaVinci Resolve results. We're seeing over 125% faster at 4K and 8K H.265 video encoding, and some Blender results showing 135% faster, 93.2% faster, and 72.4% percentage difference generation to generation. Of the 4090 versus 3080 Ti, and there was no 3090 laptop. That's why we're up against the 3080 Ti on that version. Anyway, check out Jared's Tech channel if you want a lot more details on all of that. But again, it's a bit limited in what exactly they are allowed to say about all of that. Now, we're also seeing some prices listed for some of the upcoming RTX 40 laptops. It's looking like Video Cards is reporting on pricing from Micro Center, and these look like the MSI models, and they have a 4090 laptop coming in at $4,700, and a cheaper model at only $4,000. It's budget comparison. 4080 laptop at $3,300, a 4070 at $1,700. A 4060 at $1,500, and a 4050 at $1,200, although there's another version of that with a 4060 at $1,200. So, NVIDIA had claimed, I think, that we'd see at least some 4050 laptops starting at $1,000. It's at least, the ones we're seeing listed here, which is not every laptop ever, seem to be starting a bit higher than that. So keep that in mind. Now, in other tests we're seeing on these, again from Jared Tech, who got his hands on some of these MSI laptops, while he couldn't share the graphics performance on the 40 series, one of them did come with an Intel i9-13980HX laptop processor, and so he could share some stats on that, which was quite interesting. And did see it extremely fast, showing over 30,000 points in Cinebench R23. So putting up some big numbers there. Again, I encourage you to take a look at the official, the full videos at Jared's Tech. I will link everything in my description here. And so in other news, we're seeing the, where is it? Clicked on the wrong article. So RTX 4080s, the GPU is the 8103, and it's been the dash 300. But now we're seeing die shots of a dash 301, so a 1 at the end there. There's been a lot of information swirling around about what exactly is this. Are there any major differences? And this does appear to be a real thing. And apparently, according to the poster who showed the actual die shot, is saying that this has been available for a long time, although that's probably the Chinese market. Now, this is said to not have any difference in performance at all, some improvements to stability and the like. And I think the main difference is that the voltage comparator is now integrated onto the GPU rather than on PC. And this could... So it would require a slight redesign to the boards. So I wouldn't really get hung up on whether your board has that or not, but anything that could bring any slight cost savings would be welcome, in my opinion. It would be interesting to see if we ever see any of that passed on to the consumer. We do see this being confirmed as shipping in a Gainward card.
Phone charging slow. This is the fastest phone charger on the market.
There's a 90% chance your phone is already infected with this. There's a new groundbreaking discovery that's reversing planned obsolescence, and smartphone companies are trying their hardest to make it illegal in the US. Rather than spending $1,200 to $1,800 on a brand new smartphone every year, this $37 device is the best and most cost-effective way to turn your slow smartphone into a lightning-fast handheld supercomputer that will last a lifetime. The gadget uses
when you look at the specs here. So again, I think some of the other GPUs might also be getting that one at the end kind of listing for those specs as well. So anyway, in other news, in my last video, I mentioned that the Intel Core i9 13900KS CPU would be coming out soon. Since then, it looks like it has come out. We have not seen a large number of benchmarks on them, and I don't benchmark CPUs on my channel. But it does look like Hardware Unboxed did get a hold of one and did publish a review on it, but they weren't sampled one by Intel. So it's unclear if Intel will eventually release review samples of these, or if it's just up to media outlets to get their hands on one themselves. And the testing is pretty much what everybody expected, which is, hey, it's slightly, like, I mean, very, very slightly faster than a 13900K non-S and costs a lot more. So really the only people who would be interested in this would be people who are very interested in extreme overclocking and want the binned chip. Because other than that, why would you spend over $100 more on the MSRP for like 2% more performance? It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Now, I thought this tweet was interesting. This is from Ayaneo, who make handheld gaming computers, sort of Steam Deck competitor type devices. Now, what was really interesting to me about this one, talking about their next two coming in 2023, is that it mentions not just a next-gen 7000 series CPU, they also mention new discrete graphics. Now that's interesting, because unless this is a typo, and you would think, and it's not just in the tweet, it's on one of their marketing slide shots here as well. It would be really interesting to see discrete graphics on this type of device. Usually you get integrated graphics onto like the APU. If there was actually a discrete graphics card in this form factor, first of all, that would probably give it a huge performance edge over the competition. However, I can't help but wonder what that would mean about the battery life, because, even a pretty power efficient mobile GPU, like maybe would this be like the 7600S we saw? Like, I think even its lowest power configurations, that would still be like 50 watts, which I would think would just blaze through the battery life of a device like this. Might be interested plugged in. I don't know, but I'm just curious about that. Now, another thing I hate right now is 7000 series CPU from AMD. Well, according to their new mobile CPU naming scheme, that does not necessarily mean it's on the new Zen 4 architecture. It could be Zen 3 or even Zen 2, depending on what this third number actually ends up being on the CPU that we actually get integrated into that. But still thought it was pretty interesting. Now, speaking of some AMD GPUs, I thought these tests were really interesting at Computer Base. So a while back, there was a driver update that was reported to help like power consumption during something like watching a YouTube video, which was something that people criticized at launch. Now, what that driver update did not mention was any energy efficiency improvements while gaming. However, while there does not seem to be any noticeable difference in energy usage while gaming normally, because here was the this driver versus the launch driver and just playing Doom Eternal, no difference. If you frame cap it to 144 frames per second, then there actually was a fairly massive difference in performance. So where the launch drivers, if you set those as if you set the 7900 XTX performance at 100% power usage, you can click these in their chart. I'll have this link in the description. The whole review does a whole lot more. But you see that the XTX on this newer driver was only drawing 64% of that power. And again, they're both capped to 144 frames per second in the same game. So it does seem to have done something for the energy efficiency while gaming, but only if you are frame rate limiting. But that is interesting because a lot of people do frame rate cap to their monitor's max refresh rate, especially when you're gaming at single player. So that's interesting. If you want a lot more details on that, again, check the link in the description. But speaking of AMD's GPUs, the big elephant in the room is the failure rate of the coolers on the reference model specifically. So remember, if you're getting a custom XTX cooler, shouldn't be an issue. But the made by AMD reference design, now a lot of people have been curious how many of these are failing. Now, this WCCF Tech article, and I've seen a whole bunch of other articles reporting this 11% number, and I was curious, where does this 11% failure rate number coming from? Because that sounds really high. Apparently, that was reported by Igor's Lab.
Especially as some cards are literally a stupid option compared to faster cards selling for significantly less. And stay tuned to the end because we're also going to recommend GPUs at up to $350, around $500, $800, and $1,000 or more, especially in the wake of the RX 7900 XT and XTX. It's an exciting time to be a gamer, and I'm going to make sure that the money you're spending is getting you the most performance possible right now. Let me explain. But before we get into that, let me show you something I think you're really going to like. The fundamental reason why I make videos for you to enjoy is because I love to learn. And if you're watching this, you probably love learning too, about topics and hobbies that really excite you. But I'm not talking about this kind of learning. I'm talking about the new wedgie-free way of learning that's better for your brain and your butt. I've been using Skillshare for about 6 months now, and I can't recommend it enough. So the place that we're going to start in this video is to explain how we're going to do the calculation and what GPUs we're looking at, what the prices are, and how they're going to relate to performance in your computer in the games that you play. So what I want to do is draw your attention to this. This is our cost per frame analysis for every single RTX 3000 and RX 6000 GPU that has been released over the last couple of years. We've also included the new RTX 4080 and the 4090 in this calculation. So what we have here is the card itself, the MSRP for the card with some estimation for, say, like the RTX 3080 12GB that never officially got an MSRP. The next column over, we have the links for all the cards that we have the prices for right here. And we've got the pricing for the actual GPUs that we found, the brand new pricing that you can get right now. And some of these straight off the bat look pretty good, but some of them are atrocious. We're not even going to comment on the RTX 4080 and 4090 being well above their MSRP. Well, at least for the 4080, it's come down a bit, but $2,187.94 for an RTX 4090 is a stupid amount of money. But essentially what we can do with this column is take the price of the graphics card and then divide it by the amount of frames that it gets in a given resolution. Now, the resolution in the frames per second that you see here is just 12 different games. So if you're playing something like CSGO, the number will probably be significantly higher than this for every single resolution for the given card. But if you're playing something like Cyberpunk, the number will probably be lower. But this is going to be a good average for what you may want to achieve across the games that you might play. And that is the entire reason why we do a cost per frame analysis, because essentially you want to find out if at 1080p in the games that you play, if you're going to get 100 frames per second, how much is each and every one of those frames costing you? because from that calculation, you can then compare it to a different GPU that you may be able to purchase, one that may be even better value. So now that you understand what a cost per frame analysis is and how we're going to be using it today, there is one thing that I want to kind of highlight: how it may be misinterpreted or not used correctly. Because the temptation with a cost per frame analysis is to have a look at the resolution and only stick to what is the lowest price per frame. But the thing that you really do need to consider on top of that is, what is your minimum frame rate that you're willing to accept? If we take a look back at the data right here, we can see that the RTX 3050 is one of the best 4K gaming GPUs for price to performance in terms of value. But then you realize it only generates about 33 frames per second on average across our test suite. That is not an acceptable level of gaming performance, at least in my opinion. So the way that you need to interpret this data is to have a look at what your minimum acceptable frame rate is, and then focus on cards with the best price to performance given that frame rate. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing for 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. With solutions that would be a good gaming experience at the best value for those cards. But before we get onto that, there is one thing that I do want to highlight: prices versus MSRP. Because in some circumstances, they are way above MSRP even multiple years later after the crash. And that is a bit of a stupid situation to be in and a bit of a sorry affair. But it does highlight which cards to fundamentally avoid, because there are some absolutely stellar options, especially in the mid to low end. So let's take a look at new prices versus MSRP. As you can see with AMD across the board, nearly all models are pretty much below their MSRP by a good 20%, 10%, 30%, something like that. Other than the RX 6800 XT, which ironically the cheapest one that we could find right now is $879.99, which is over $200 more than its MSRP multiple years ago. But this is kind of offset a little bit. When you take a look at something like the RX 6950 XT, which is $799.99, that is less than the 6900 XT and the 6800 XT, which is another reason why you should be looking at videos like this. For buyers of the 6800 XT, I would be very upset if you spent $879.99 thinking that that's the card that you need for your performance level, when for less money you could get significantly more performance. The 6950 XT is actually one of the top rasterization cards that you can buy right now, other than the 4090 and 4080. And speaking of NVIDIA, for their new prices, things are a bit all over the place. Here we can see that nearly no cards are currently selling for their MSRP or lower until you get to around the 3080 12GB mark, with a question mark MSRP. So even that's not really a solid representation of that. So you're looking to get to the 3080 Ti territory before you start looking at cards with prices lower than their MSRP. So now that you know how prices relate to MSRP at the moment, let's take a look at the most important part of this video. Which are the best GPUs to buy right now in terms of price performance given a resolution? Exactly how you would buy a GPU. Let's start with the most popular, 1080p. And here we go. As you can see, from anything from the RX 6600 all the way up to the RTX 3090 Ti, you're going to get an excellent 1080p experience. With the 6600, you're kind of just below what I would call a mid to high refresh rate, but something like the RX 6700 XT would easily get you that, about 152 frames per second in the test suite. For NVIDIA to get about the same performance as those two cards, you would be looking at the RTX 3060 compared to the 6600, and also the RTX 3070 or 3070 Ti compared to the RX 6700 XT. And that's what we're going to determine with you today. What is the best card to focus on right now? What has the best price to performance in 1080p? Let's take a look at the next chart. At 1080p, the cost per frame analysis looks like this. Essentially, what you want to be doing is having a look at the resolution that you want to target, how many frames per second that you want to achieve, and then select the card with the best price to performance in terms of frame rate. And that's exactly what we have right here, with the RX 6650 being an excellent option for 1080p mid to high refresh gaming, generating on average 132 frames per second across the test suite at a price of $1.89 per frame. That is excellent compared to pretty much all of the competition. The closest match from NVIDIA would be the RTX 3060 Ti, at $2.77 per frame. It is almost $1 more expensive per frame compared to the RX 6650 XT, but generates just shy of about 10% more frames. But then when we take a look at the actual new pricing of them, the RX 6650 XT is selling for $249.99 right now, and almost as cheap as the RX 6600. The 3060 Ti in comparison is pretty much locked onto its MSRP of $400. And that is the way that you need to look at this. 10% more frames is fantastic, but at double the price. And that seems to be exactly where AMD is winning right now. They are offering a much better price to performance than NVIDIA given a price point. And it's pretty much across the stack, leaving the only reason to buy NVIDIA pretty much because of their software suite and CUDA support. If you are purely just interested in gaming and streaming, I would highly recommend that you look into some of these AMD cards. They are a staggering price at the moment, which is also reflected in our 1440p results. For AMD, pretty much all of their cards will support a decent 1440p experience, with the higher end cards giving you a much better experience, especially for high refresh rate gaming. From anything from the 6600 generating on average 74 frames per second at 1440p. But if you want to step up to the high refresh rate gaming experience, you'd be looking at more of the 6800, 6800 XT or higher from AMD. For NVIDIA, pretty much anything will support a decent 1440p experience apart from the RTX 3050. That is teetering on the edge of an acceptable gaming experience for most gamers. So you'd be looking at more like the RTX 3060 to get a decent 1440p experience at 60 FPS. But again, stepping up to the high refresh rate gaming, you'll be looking at more of the RTX 3080 level of performance. So how do they compare to one another? What is the best price to performance for a 1440p experience? Let's take a look at that now, which also shows that the RX 6650 XT is a stunning value at the moment. Even at 1440p, you'd be looking to get around 92 frames per second at a value of $2.72 per frame at 1440p, which is now the best value GPU at 1080p and 1440p, while still providing an acceptable gaming experience. For NVIDIA, the RTX 3060 Ti is still the top contender at this price point, at this resolution, at $3.76 per frame. But again, it is $1 more expensive per frame than the RX 6650 XT. For NVIDIA, looking at more the high refresh rate option for 1440p, the RTX 3080 10GB and 12GB are kind of your good starting points for something like that, getting around the 144 frames per second average for 1440p. But prices here are getting a little bit weird. The RTX 3070 Ti at $5.89 per frame, the RTX 3080 10GB at $7.05, the RTX 3080 12GB at $6.04. And this is exactly why you need to take a look at charts like this. If you had your heart set on an RTX 3080 10GB and you weren't looking at anything else, you could seriously miss out on a really good deal, or even worse, pay way more than what you should do for that card. And a really good example of this is the RTX 3080. Like I said, $7.05, but you could buy an RTX 3080 Ti, which would actually cost you less money and get you a better experience. This is the same with AMD. The RX 6950 XT looking to be an excellent value at the top end for AMD. The only thing that beats it in the mid to high end is the RX 6800, which is still a great gaming experience. But comparing it to the 6800 XT, still 157 frames. Nothing to scoff at all. It's about 10 frames less per second than the RX 6950 XT. But then the thing that you have to remember is that the 6950 XT is on sale right now for $800, whereas the 6800 XT is selling for $879.99. Do you really want to pay more for less performance? What I was going to do is also go through this data in terms of the 4K experience, but I think the people playing at 4K and 4K high refresh, you kind of know what GPUs are in that power target and performance target. So what I'm going to do is throw up the data on screen for you now, just in case you don't. And this is all very much relatable to what we've been talking about today. Frames per second versus resolution, and also the cost per frame analysis in 4K. Which brings us onto the recommendations section. What I'm going to do is break things up into different price categories and give you a strong recommendation as to which GPU to buy. If you have up to $350, about $500, about $800, and $1,000 and over, which GPUs should you get? Let's take a look. So although I will be giving recommendations for both AMD and NVIDIA, as I understand that there are preferences either way in terms of CUDA support and other software features that NVIDIA might have, but also bear in mind that AMD cards are a fantastic option if you don't need that for video editing, 3D modeling, CUDA support in terms of parallel programming. So for $350, what is my recommendation? Well, for AMD, you really should be looking no further than the RX 6650 XT. At $250, it is even cheaper than cards of lower performance in AMD's product stack. It offers a fantastic 1080p gaming experience while also being quite competent at 1440p. But for NVIDIA, it's kind of a lot harder to give a solid recommendation. The card that is most comparable to the RX 6650 XT in terms of price is the RTX 3050. And that is a significant drop in performance compared to the 6650 XT, while also costing around $20 more. So to get a similar level of performance compared to the 6650 XT, you'd be looking at more like the RTX 3060 or 3060 Ti. But the 3060 Ti is still at its $400 MSRP, and the 3060 is slightly over its MSRP. That is a lot more money for a lot less performance. So the thing that I want you to do is think long and hard whether you actually need NVIDIA, the software suite and everything that comes with that. Because if you don't, if all that you do is game and stream, you are leaving a lot of performance off the table by going for NVIDIA over AMD. So before we take a look at the confusing section of $800 and $1,000+ GPUs, let's take a look at the $500 mark. For NVIDIA, you are still looking at the RTX 3070 with a $500 MSRP, but a $510 card still available right now. It's going to offer you
Must know what the start button does. But what's this? And what are these? How did I do that? Buckle up, dear viewer, because we are about to get our hands dirty with some lesser known features of Windows. And once you've joined us, you will become more powerful than I can possibly imagine. Powerful! Like our sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the play online vehicle combat game. The one with over 2,000 different vehicles. Boring. But it allows you to tweak some very interesting settings under the hood. Like, have you ever wanted to hide? hide certain settings so your less tech-savvy relatives don't mess them up? Or how about turning off some of Windows' phone home features? There are a seriously massive number of dials and knobs that you can adjust in here to customize Windows. And if you've ever used a locked down library or work PC, I assure you that it's at least partially thanks to group policies. The issue, though, is that by default, it doesn't come with home editions of Windows. A shining example of an artificial limitation, and it is exactly the sort of thing that Microsoft has been criticized for in the past. Not to worry, though, because you can force it by opening a command prompt as administrator and using these commands. It'll take about 30 seconds, and once it's done, even home users can enjoy fuller control over their PC. I mean, yes, you could make these adjustments yourself if you like to roleplay as a registry hackerman, but this way is far easier and, in my opinion, more of a middle finger to Microsoft anyway. For a two-handed bird, if that method doesn't work for you, you can grab Policy Plus instead. It's not built into Windows, it's not from Microsoft, but it's open source and offers the same functionality with a similar interface. Speaking of, have you ever had an app that runs on startup but has to use admin privileges, so it asks you every single time you boot your PC? Enter Task Scheduler. You can create a basic task that starts up the app when you log in, then check this box before clicking finish. And you see that Run with Highest Privileges button? Check that. You should go to the Settings tab and make sure to uncheck this box to make sure it doesn't stop running after the default of 3 days. And that's it. Done. You'll never see it again. And there are all kinds knobs and dials in here to make stuff run automatically exactly the way that you want. Like you can make things happen or not when you're on battery, or you can make it wait for when there's a network connection. If you've got multiple things you want to run with the same rules, just add more actions. Want to pop up an alert whenever Windows detects a disk error? You got it. Just add a new trigger. This is seriously underrated stuff. I used to use it to crank up my speaker volume, then play music as an alarm for school when my clock was broken. There are also some app suites that you can download to further enhance your Windows experience. If you've heard of those ones before, you might think that this section is going to be all about Power Toys. You'd be wrong, but those are super cool, and we are going to talk about those first. Power Toys are Microsoft's own in-house extensions to Windows, and they've been around in some form or another since the Windows 95 days. If you were around back then and remember using Tweak UI, a tool to change the responsiveness of the start menu, that was a Power Toy. Some of the Power Toys released over time have actually made their way into mainstream Windows as well. Virtual desktops, window previews in the Alt-Tab menu, and virtual CD-ROM drives are just some of them. So in that sense, Power Toys can be seen as kind of a playground for Microsoft engineers to trial future features. Today's Power Toys have a wide variety of functions, with my favorites being Fancy Zones, Power Toys Run, and Keyboard Manager. Fancy Zones is basically essential for anyone with a large or ultra-wide or otherwise non-traditional desktop layout because it makes it super easy to quickly snap windows to specific portions of your screen. It effectively replaces the standard window manager and is just a step away from the tiling window managers that you'd find in the Linux world, complete with dedicated keyboard controls for focusing windows and the ability to control the sizes and positions of your windows. There's nothing quite like it on any other operating system. Power Toys Run is one of those things you would expect to be built into Windows, but is not. So thank goodness it exists as a Power Toy. It's basically Apple's Spotlight search, and it is thankfully not the same as the start menu search. Often the results will be substantially more accurate and useful. Like Spotlight, you can make it do calculations, unit conversions, and much more, and it's super quick to get at, with the default key combo being Alt-Space. Personally, I change it to Windows Space since that's what you'd use for it on a Mac, and Alt-Space is already used in Windows for window control. Keyboard Manager, this one's super cool. If you've ever wanted to remap a key or create macros, but you don't want to use memory-hungry third-party software, this is for you. You can map any key to any other key, including combinations. And what's even cooler is that you can map keyboard shortcuts on a per-app basis. It's not powerful enough to be able to record and play back long sequences of keystrokes, but it's enough to handle a lot of common tasks. Enough about Power Toys, though. I promised to go deeper, and I shall. Look how deep I'm going. Microsoft has another group of utilities that are technically under their umbrella as well, called sysinternals, which they acquired back in 2006 when it was called Winternals and run by Mark Russinovich. They're a lot like Power Toys, but with more focused use cases, often with the goal of getting under the operating system's hood. There's a massive number of these that are being updated to this day, but the most broadly useful, in my opinion, are Autoruns, Process Explorer, and TCP View. Honorable mention goes to RegJump, by the way, because it is such a useful tool to quickly open the registry editor to a specific key. Just run it as administrator and paste in the path. No navigating through the little tree. Now, we've talked about Autoruns before, and for good reason. Autoruns gives you the ability to see virtually every startup item, service, and DLL that is registered for use inside of Windows. In the default view, it hides Windows standard entries, but still is probably going to be chock full of stuff that you probably won't recognize. The good news is that a lot of this is normal and entirely benign, even some of the things highlighted in red or completely empty. It's still a super useful tool though, especially for advanced users when they're trying to diagnose malware infections or misbehaving drivers. The double-edged sword here is that its power makes it potentially dangerous for inexperienced users who don't know what they're looking for. The good news is if you're inexperienced, you can simply save the state of the system and send it over so a more experienced eyes can open it up on another computer to analyze and modify via the Analyze Offline System function. It is indispensable for troubleshooting. Process Explorer is like Task Manager, but on roids. In fact, you can even replace Task Manager with it. You can see the performance history of a given process, see all the connections it has open, see what the environment it was launched with was, and so much more. If you're curious what files a program has open, you can show the lower pane and click the Handles tab to see. And if you want to find out which process has a file open, you can use the Find Handle or DLL function to get a complete listing. Clicking on the results brings you directly to that process. And if you're not sure what process a window is attached to, use the crosshairs icon. Bam! There is so much utility in here, including some that made it into the official Task Manager eventually, like the Search Online function. Then there's TCP View. This looks a lot like Process Explorer, but instead shows you all the network connections that your computer is currently maintaining, grouped by the process that's using them. This can be a little overwhelming to look at while it's constantly changing around, so you can pause it to leaf through it on your own time. The remote address is the server that the connection is made to, and you can look it up right in TCP View via the Whois function to see where it is. Not everything can be ID'd this way though, and that doesn't indicate a security problem in itself. So like most of these tools, it's all about giving you the ability to peek under the hood, which can be a godsend when it comes to troubleshooting who might be listening. Back to some included features though. You might be aware that Windows 11 added the ability to run Android apps if you watched our video testing it out. But did you know that you can also run full-blown Linux right on top of Windows? Windows Subsystem for Linux is available on both Windows 10 and Windows 11 and does exactly what it says on the tin. Open a terminal as administrator, type WSL -- install, and following a reboot, you're ready to rock. If you're not feeling the default Ubuntu, you can get a list of available alternatives using this command. Then install your choice with this one. You're not limited to just one either, so have fun experimenting. You can even install and run desktop apps within them, and they will appear right on your desktop. WSL isn't just for experimentation, though. Did you know that File Explorer can show Linux folders now, too? You can even pass through Linux-formatted drives and access them via your WSL distro. This is super useful, not only for dual booters, but also for system admins who might run Windows desktops but manage Linux servers. I mean, sure, you could spin up a Linux install specifically for disaster recovery, or you could just use WSL. One thing WSL can't give you that's becoming common in Linux, though, is a drop-down terminal like Quake or Yaquake. But what if I told you you can get the same thing in Windows even without WSL as of 2021? Officially called Quake Mode, this will give you exactly what you're after with the key combo of your choice. Just open a terminal window, go to Settings, then Actions. Click Add New, then choose Show Hide Quake Window. You will need to launch Windows Terminal first for this to work, but thankfully we've given you the tools to show you how to automatically launch it at startup, right? Then just set it to hide in the notification area once it's minimized. Now you've got a terminal available to you whenever you need one. And if you want more out of your terminal, this one isn't built into Windows, but it is recommended by the official documentation. You can get fancy extended functionality and custom prompts in the terminal if you use Oh My Posh. It's available in the Microsoft Store for free, and it looks a lot like Oh My ZSH on Linux and macOS, hence the name. If all you want is to customize the theme of your terminal, though, you won't need anything like that, and you can even go as far as to set a background image in the profile settings. Seriously, Anthony is a Linux user and still feels that this is one of the slickest terminal interfaces out there, while still remaining easy to use. There's even a package manager now via Winget, which lets you install even desktop software directly from a terminal, which means you can automate it and automate updating it. Seriously, basically everything we searched for that has a freely available Windows version on or off the Microsoft Store is in there. And if it's not, you can probably find it in Chocolatey, which you can also install through Winget. Isn't that wild? Not only does Windows have a good terminal now, it also has SSH support for remote access, both as a client and as a server. The client is built in, and you just use it like any other SSH client. It even supports port forwarding and file transfers. The cherry on top is that if you're into using keys for SSH, which you should be, some password managers, like 1Password, offer the ability to use what's known as an SSH agent so that your keys are available without needing to copy them to your PC. When you try to connect, you'll get a prompt to unlock your password manager, and you're off to the races. The server function, meanwhile, needs to be installed through the optional features. Just click View Features, then search for SSH, and Open SSH Server is right there. Install it, and you're ready to go. By going to this folder and editing the sshd_config file, you can set up private keys for better security, port forwarding, and more, just like you would on Linux. There's all kinds of little things sprinkled throughout Windows too. Like, did you know that there are keyboard shortcuts for stuff like this? That's not even close to all of them. One of them does what you probably already know about if you've ever right-clicked the Start menu, which is in itself a really useful feature that was first introduced in Windows 8. And there's also that God Mode folder that makes the rounds from time to time, although I don't personally think it's that useful. It's basically all the options in Control Panel laid out in a list. But hey, if it's useful for you, just create a folder and name it like this. What I feel is more useful, this has saved me lots of times, are the application menu and the shutdown command. The application menu is what you get if you click an app's icon in its title bar. What's important here is that move command. In the likely case that something weird happens and a window ends up way outside of the visible screen area, or like on another monitor you can't get to and there's no way to interact with it, just select it on the taskbar, then use the keyboard shortcut to activate the menu, Alt-Space. Then hit M. Press an arrow key, any one of them, then move your mouse. That window is now attached to your cursor. Click to set read a brief. Maybe a cook with a retropolar fleet down command. This one is very useful. If you've ever found yourself with no video output whatsoever and the hot key to reset the video driver isn't working, but then you hit caps lock or numlock and your keyboard LEDs still function, so the thing must be on, you can still safely shut down and reboot. Hold the Windows key and hit R. Then type this command, which is basically telling the PC to restart with no delay. Once you hit enter, assuming you typed it right, it should do exactly that. If not, or if you think you made a typo, just hit escape and repeat the process. You can do more with the shutdown command too, like you can create a shortcut to reboot into your UEFI settings with this command. And this command will reboot into advanced startup settings, which is super useful if you need to do that without a display or without having access to Windows' normal UI, like, say, for example, if you're rebooting a headless machine in another room, or if there's a driver that's making it so that all of a sudden you can't see anything as soon as all of your drivers load and you have no way to get into safe mode. And you can shut down other computers using a command like this, where the name or IP goes right here. There's a whole world of commands like shutdown that you might not know about. It's worth checking out the Learn article on Microsoft's website to see more if you're curious. Curious? Like you're curious about this message from our sponsor, War Thunder. If you're looking for a comprehensive vehicle combat game, give War Thunder a try. It's free to play on PC, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Series X with crossplay. With over 2,000 vehicles, including tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships, there is something for everyone to pilot, and the vehicles are modeled down to individual components, offering an immersive combat experience. There are 100 years worth of historically accurate vehicles ranging from the 1920s all the way to the present day. So whether you want fast-paced and action-focused or tactical and realistic, War Thunder is going to have exactly the PvP style that you prefer. Rather than a traditional hit point system, War Thunder uses the damage X-ray system, showing actual damage on the vehicles. Plus, there's no extras needed, so you can fly any aircraft with a keyboard and mouse. The focus on visible damage adds a layer of immersion you don't often get from free-to-play games. So click the link below.
Uh, mm, mm, mm. So you gonna finally talk to me or what? He told me to fucking tell her that I'm on and then didn't fucking come. They're gonna come. I don't want to come. I just want to come because I don't want to come because you know you want to come.
Long, 360 millimeter radiator support, and integrated DRGB lighting compatible with all motherboard RGB lighting controllers. To see the full list of specs and colors available, follow the link in the description below. This is the ROG Crosshair X670E Extreme. Would already know that the X in X670 means extreme. So this is the Extreme 670 Extreme. 3 extremes. That's why it's also 3 times the price.
Maybe the E is expensive, not extreme.
Oh, it's the extremely expensive Extreme. This is a $999 motherboard. This is like AMD's, at least not, well, Asus ROG's current top of the line AMD motherboard. Now, they will probably get more expensive than that. They like the Glacier for like their Intel boards was like $2,000 or something crazy like that. Components are just so expensive right now. But the reason why we're even looking at this right now is because I told you when I did the delated 7950X CPU that I'm building myself an AMD system to start using at home to replace my 10th gen 10900K Intel system. It'll be my first time using AMD at home as my primary system since 2012. It's been a decade since I started this channel with a 8120 and then ended up going up to an 8350 and later on, and then I moved on to Ivy Bridge, and then that's been Intel ever since. So it's exciting for me to be able to see like, what kind of crazy ass system can I build for AMD? The only problem is like, AMD used to be this amazing value. Like it was amazing performance at a value. It's just now, unfortunately, as they caught up performance-wise, manufacturers like Asus started making super high-end products for AMD because they got back market share, which means now a lot of the value is gone if you start looking at this tier of component. If you're looking at building an AMD rig on any sort of a budget, this motherboard is not for you. And by budget, I mean most people wouldn't consider spending $500 on a motherboard. This is double that. It's still fun to look at it, right? I can't afford a Bugatti Veyron, but it's sure fun to look at it. I want to see if this is going to work with my current case. The case I have at home that I want to reuse is the Inwin 925. It's a smaller brother to the Inwin 928, which is a double wide monstrous case. Singularity Computers even sent me a couple of distribution blocks and pump combo distro plates for it. A back one and a side one. My concern about the one that goes on the back wall is this is a very wide motherboard that Asus continues to have 180-degree plugs for the 24-pin coming out of it, which means now with the distribution block there and the grommets, I'm not entirely sure if it's gonna fit, which was the problem I had with this exact layout on the Spectre case. So anyway, this motherboard is ridiculously heavy. Dude. About 3,030 grams. I'm not a fan of the font right there that just says Crosshair. I'm not a fan of that. I think that looks cheesy actually and takes away some of the premium feel of it. So anyway, there's the Gen Z.2 right there, which is, remember the DIMM.2, which had an area to be able to mount a couple of extra M.2s? That could mount on there, which will add to the weight. In fact, I need to kind of add all that stuff up and then reweigh it. Anyway, we'll get back to this in a second. I want to see what accessories come with it because the box is still very, very heavy of stuff. All right, so this has been coming with AMD motherboards for a while now. This is an additional control box for fans and RGB. Here is that Gen Z.2. So this is the successor to the M.2, which was very successful. If you mount M.2s underneath this cover, to get to them, you would have to remove the graphics card. If you have a water-cooled graphics card or something like that, especially if it's rigid tubed or anything, then you'd have to drain your system, make sure you get all the water out of these tubes, get the graphics card out, then take the cover off and get to those drives. But check this out. It even has a heat sink and a heat pipe on it. So this allows us to add 2 more SSDs. There's one that mounts to either side. Now, only one side actually connects to the heat pipe. That's this one. This one right here is the only one that touches the heat pipe. So the other side is going to get some passive cooling from this piece of metal. And then this guy just goes like that. That looks so cool. Anyway, with all the motherboards from AMD, this is the nicest boards, especially the RG boards. You get this screwdriver, which has a removable bit. And then, of course, you get your USB stick with all your drivers. Thank you for including USB sticks, guys. So many brands are still including CDs. What in the heck is this guy? Oh, this is a GPU mount or GPU support. Yeah, it's magnetic. So you can put that in your case. And then this is designed to just push up on your graphics card. It's rubberized. That only works if the graphics card is within that range. But at least they're providing it. This right here is just a connector to put all your front panel connectors on your case onto this, and then this goes into the motherboard. It's just a single jumper wire of some sort. I'm not sure exactly what that jumper is. So this right here is actually a proprietary ARGB header on this end, as you can see. Then it terminates to 2 motherboard style ARGB headers here. So now we're up to 8 because we have 6 on here and then 2 more on here. Remember, this is going to utilize 1 from the motherboard. So you can't count this and say we got 8 plus 2 on the board because 1 on the board has to input or output and input into this. So we lose 1 off the board. So that's where that goes. All the connectors on this motherboard, as you can see, are right angle right there. So everything is going to push potentially into my distro plate. Hopefully not. The 925 is not exactly what you would call a small case, but they are things that I have to consider. And so I'm going to have to, just double check all of this and make sure I'm going to have plenty of clearance. ROG True Voltician. So I don't actually know what the True Voltician is, but I was reading about it right now, seeing that it came with it on the site. This, I'm assuming, is just some sort of a probe. That's a USB header right there. That's a micro USB. And then we have jumpers everywhere. It's gonna be some crazy overclocking thing that I'm not even gonna care about. One, because I'm delidded, and two, I will be undervolting. Replacement little hold down clips for like the M.2s, actual M.2 hold down screw, and then our case badge, which appears to be metal, like actually metal. So all of the little bits right here, this should be our manual. Yep, this is where I'll be able to learn about the voltition. My God, it just keeps going. I mean, at least you're getting some money's worth, right? 2 more, 4 more, 8 more, but these are, oh, they're all braided. Wow, these are actually braided. And each one comes with a dual 180 and a 180 to a 190 plug for the SATA cables, but these are paracord braided. It's kind of nice to see. So you actually get 2, 4, 6 of them. Okay, so this is just an ARGB extension cable. You get a key tag. This is an ARGB splitter. I love this because here's the thing. When you're building your systems, especially when it comes to ARGB, there's nothing that ruins your day faster than realizing you ran out of plugs and you got to order something from Amazon or whatever and wait for it. But check this out. They give you that control box. Look at the length of this splitter. So this is a single to triple splitter here for ARGB, which can also be split off of the control box, not just the motherboard. So you could put this on the control box end and then have 3 coming out of that. If you do that too much, you're going to run out of signal and then your lights will start acting all weird. So don't do it a whole bunch. But anyway, look at the length of this. That is longer than most cables you get with a fan these days. This right here is a PWM, single PWM fan to triple fan splitter. Remember I said we could hook this up to the control box as well. These are all your different temperature probes. So you can hook these up. The motherboard has various places you can hook up temperature sensor probes. You can use temperature tape to hold this down on something, set it inside your graphics card, set it inside the heat sink somewhere, maybe route it under your cooler, put it on anywhere you want. And then this can become a control point for your Armoury Crate software to be able to control your fans. So that's nice to see. And then this here is just another ARGB splitter. And then this is just mounting tape, M.2 thin mounting tape for other things, I guess. And this is just our antenna. It is a single wire, well, it's a dual wire that's connected together that goes into 2 connections here for the back of your motherboard. And then you set the antenna where it's convenient so it can have the best visibility in terms of interference with being behind your case or tower. All right, so that's everything that comes with it. You can see, you know, it's $1,000 motherboard, but you get a lot of things with it, which definitely help aid in the completion of your build. Let me get all these accessories back in here, and then we'll look over the motherboard. Actually, I'm not done. For those of you that have lots of M.2 drives, remember I showed you that we have the M.2 or the Gen Z.2 that we can mount 2 M.2s to. We can also mount 2 M.2s onto this guy right here, which is just a PCIe 5.0 card. So it is a 5.0 card because this is a 5.0 motherboard, and you can add 2 more. No, wait, 1. We can add 1 more. That would have to be a hell of a drive just to have this whole thing, which is a heat sink, has a thermal pad and all that. That is just for 1 M.2. So we're now up to 3,746 grams for the weight of the board before we put any RAM in it, the CPU, our cooler, and any M.2 drives. It says right on here, for those who dare. Yeah, for those who dare to test the structural integrity of their case. So before we do the tour here, the True Voltition here basically is just an oscilloscope. It's a voltage monitor. So this plugs right into the USB like this. Then we can monitor 3 volt and 5 volt, depending on the jumper locations. And this allows us to then hook up pin outs. That's what those connectors were that I showed you that just look like a single pin on each side. We can use that to actually do voltage monitoring. And then it can even turn itself into a server, basically, where you could keep an eye on this, monitoring it on another system, seeing what the real-time voltage readouts are. Extreme overclocking tool, something I won't be needing. I'm curious as if the XOC guys would actually use this, or they would end up just soldering on their own measurement points somewhere on the board and doing it their own way. This is designed to just make life easier for people that do that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a tour here. I'm gonna take the cover off. So underneath here, that is thick. That's a thick boy right there. Woo-wee. Anyway, as you can see, the thermal pads are pre-applied. Thermal pads on this side too. That way, if you have double-sided M.2 drives, you'd be able to get some active cooling on both sides.
Before you renew Amazon Prime, watch this. Look, I love Amazon Prime. Free 2-day shipping is great. And like I well, guess it is.
This guy right here doesn't actually come off, and this does illuminate. There is a backlight here that they created an ROG logo out of ROG letters. So we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then with the other 5.0 drive sled, 5 M.2s, which is not like the most impressive amount of M.2s, but it's not terrible either. This is honestly where your main drive should be first. Like I said, drive on the heatsink side, secondary drive on the other side, then these two guys right here, in my opinion, and then the 5.0. We've had issues in the past of actually getting, if you mix the drives, say you put a PCIe 5.0 and a PCIe 4.0, or a 4.0 and a 3.0 on the same, now this sled only has one drive, so that's not gonna be a problem. But we've had ones in the past that have come with ROG that have two, like 45-degree mounted M.2s. If you mix the generation on those, it's gonna default to the slowest one. So if you have a Gen 3 and a Gen 4, you're only gonna get Gen 3 speeds through it. So something to keep in mind, and the same is probably true for this guy right here. If you can have multiple drives connecting through a single interface, it's gonna default to the slowest compatibility. So keep that in mind. Anyway, here is our CPU socket right here. One thing to keep in mind, extremely tall heat sinks. Like this is just like a cityscape of skyscrapers around it. Your cooler height, depending on what kind of cooler you have, might interfere with some of these, and that's worth keeping in mind. Coolers are getting better about being compatible with tall heat sinks because as core counts have gotten more dense in CPUs, the coolers have had to also get more dense. They've also had to be able to start clearing these things. The RAM is still somewhat close to the CPU. So depending on your cooler, you might have overhang on top of your RAM. Kind of surprised they didn't space that out just a little bit more considering the fact that this is a wider motherboard than standard. Now in terms of connectivity, we have 2 EPS 8-pin power right there. 1 fan header, 2 fan headers, 3 fan headers right here on the top. A 12-volt RGB. We have our Q code readout, surface mounted start and reset buttons, which are nice to see. And then we have an ARGB header, a W pump or a water pump header. So it looks like a regular fan header, which is fine, but that means it's also high amp. So if you're running something like a 12-volt DDC pump or something that has a 4-pin fan header on it, you can hook it up to this and have proper control, which means it's not gonna go to like 0 RPM. 0 RPM, auto water pump is bad, but it also is able to handle the higher amps that a water pump would draw versus fans. Anyway, we have our chassis fan there, ATX 12-volt power at a 90-degree angle, like I said. PD power, basically it's supplemental power from the motherboard. So we have 2 USB 3.0 headers next to each other on the side. I'm so glad they did that. We have another fan header right here. And then this is our SATA connectors. You'll notice we're getting less and less SATA connectors. We're down to 6 of them. On the bottom, another 3-pin fan header right there. We have some temperature probe headers, 2 more PWM fan headers, surface mounted buttons for clear CMOS, BIOS flashback, all of that. Our U.2 right here for our USB-C, 2 USB 2.0. These toggles are for different modes like LN2 modes and other extreme overclocking modes. And then over here, we have some more surface mounted buttons. These are like one-touch overclock buttons that are gonna adjust B clock and A clock, depending on what you have set in the BIOS. And then on the back here, as you can see, BIOS flashback and clear CMOS, 8 USB 3.0s, 10G Ethernet built in. Dude, there's 4 USB-Cs back here, I just realized. And 2 of these are DisplayPort. That's actually pretty awesome. Built-in sound card, wireless, and then spit it. When you're designing a motherboard, and if there's a checkbox for a feature, they just checked all of them, basically, which is why it's $1,000. To be honest, the more I looked at this, given how motherboard manufacturing and costs have been for Intel, I'm kind of surprised it's not more, if you want to know the truth. It's still very expensive. But I also got this. This is just from Easy DIY. It's just, yes, it's RGB. Shut up. It is a 90-degree adapter. My only question is, yes, it will work this way. If I have enough width, I can re-angle it up like that. The RGB won't show, but if there's enough room here between, say, my grommet and the distro plate, this might give me enough clearance to be able to do what I need to do to get that curve. And then it's RGB. Oh, man. So this is what the flagship motherboard from Asus ROG looks like for AM5 socket. I really hope it fits in the 925. Interfere with the strobe plate. If I didn't have the strobe, fine. I even compared it to the motherboard I have now, which is a standard size, but it's also a standard mount with the 24 pin pointing up, which gives me that loop. If we get too close to the grommet, then I won't be able to make that loop. So that's the only reason right now I have this 90-degree adapter. That way I might be able to curve it back, but we'll see. It means that I won't be able to do my live stream while I'm building the system because of the fact that the system
But what we want to do in this video is kind of step back and take a higher look at things and compare the two CPU platforms and hopefully help you decide which one is the best for you in this buying season. So first up, Gordon, give us a quick refresher on the parts that are out right now.
Okay, Intel basically has only 6 models. We're only going to go over the ones we think you should buy. I would skip the KF versions. Those are the ones with IGP switched off permanently. At the top end, we have the 24-core Core i9-13900K. It launched at $589 technically, and currently on the street, it's about $627. Then we have the 16-core Core i7-13700K, launched at $409 technically. Street price is $429. And then at the bottom, we have the 14-core Core i5-13600K, launched at $319, which was a price increase. The price in the street is about $320, and you shave off $20 or so if you do the KF versions.
And these are U.S. pricing, and you looked on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, and that's as of today, early December. For AMD, we basically only have 4 chips to keep track of. The 16-core Ryzen 9 7950X, launch price of $699, current street price $573. Next up, we have the 12-core Ryzen 9 7900X, launched at $549, current street price $439. Mid-range, we have the Ryzen 7 7700X, 8 cores, launch price $399, street price $348. And of course, at the bottom end, we have the 6-core Ryzen 5 7600X, launch price $299 with a street price of $249 today.
Okay, and that's what's out before the end of the year. That's what we're keeping track of. Once again, if you want specific reviews of each of these processors, there's tons of content on there. You've done some great coverage. There's a lot of YouTube videos that you can look at. But what I kind of want to look at is the strengths and weaknesses of each company and each platform. So first off, let's start with Intel. Gordon, what do you consider the strengths of the Intel platform?
Well, I think this has been a big advantage for Intel, interestingly, is DDR4 support. A lot of people, if you have a lot of DDR4, you want to reuse it, you can actually use DDR4 with Intel. Keep in mind, if you're going to do a DDR4 build with a 13th gen CPU, you cannot go to DDR5, but you can at least use it, which is a big plus, especially if you have a lot of expensive memory you want to use with your 13th gen part.
It could save you money, but also you're probably going to miss out on some DDR5 performance.
You can't go to DDR5. You'll miss out on that goodness with it. You can only do that if you buy a new motherboard along with your new RAM.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what else?
I think this is an interesting plus for Intel. People don't think about is Z690 and also other older Intel motherboards, because 13th gen is basically compatible with 12th gen Z690 and lower chipsets. A lot of those motherboards will work perfectly fine with 13th gen, which means there's just a lot more fish in the ocean for them.
Yeah, well, and more updates because they've been out for a little longer. So if you want to save a little bit more money, maybe you can buy an older board.
Yeah, you can buy an older board if you want to save a little money, or somebody's handing you something down. There's just a lot of options when you can run in multiple chipsets with the same CPU.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
For the K parts only, which is why I recommend you buy the K part, Intel's QuickSync, which has been included with its the chips that have the IGP, the media engines in there. QuickSync is supported in a lot of applications, from Adobe to Handbrake and many, many apps. Intel's been building on application support for QuickSync for a decade or more, and that is really valuable. In fact, in like Premiere, it's a huge boost to be able to have QuickSync on your system.
In some workflows.
In some workflows, not everything. Again, this is the integrated graphics, the media engine. But if you have something that can use QuickSync, it's very nice to have that there.
Okay, not bad. What else?
Generally, of course, you got to pay for a more expensive motherboard, but Thunderbolt is far more common on Intel motherboards. it is in AMD motherboards. It's just very rare. And sometimes if you have a professional workflow where somebody's going to give you a Thunderbolt 4 or Thunderbolt 3 only drive or dock or something, Intel is going to be better in that area.
Okay, that's not bad. Anything else?
Well, talking about performance, actually, first before we get to performance, I will say generally from what I've seen with Intel parts, you can hit higher clock speeds with the memory for DDR5. So we did a build recently where we posted a system immediately into DDR5 running at 7,600 megatransfers per second. That is pretty hard to do on AMD. There's many documented cases of people saying I can get no further than DDR5 6000 on my AMD Ryzen 7000 system.
So DDR5 is more mature on the Intel platform right now.
It does seem like they can push DDR5 better on Intel, whereas you cannot currently do that on AMD parts. And that is a plus if you want to do that.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I think let's just talk about generally with performance. When you're looking at the Core i9, its real strength is in very high boost clocks. Its best strength against Ryzen, and especially against older 12th gen parts, is the lightly threaded performance. We're using 1 to 8 threads. It has an advantage over Ryzen. It has a big advantage over 12th gen, and that is generally what I think most people are going to want. If you're going to want all core, it's actually pretty good at that, but it really excels at multi-threaded performance. And it actually gets a little better for Intel because actually, if you're looking at Core i7 and Core i5, it really gives you a big advantage in multi-threaded performance over its competing AMD CPUs.
With the help of those efficiency cores on top of the performance
Yeah,
cores,
so that
but,
hybrid design of Intel where they have performance cores and efficiency cores, it lets them basically pack a lot more cores into a small socket. Right. So that's really paying off for Intel. Again, looking at Core i5 13600K, you're getting 14 cores. Yeah, some of them are efficiency cores, but they are no slouches. And you are it's easily giving you way more performance than, say, a Ryzen 5 7600X.
in multi-core performance workloads.
Yeah, in multi-core performance. And then generally in single-threaded, extremely competitive and better, slightly better, sometimes definitely better, especially at the high end than a Ryzen part.
Okay, awesome. Anything else on the Intel strength?
No, I think that's pretty much it. And we're talking in general here because there's a lot more things you can drill down into. But in generalities, I think these are really good strengths for Team Blue.
Okay, well, what about the weaknesses of Intel? Well, what do you perceive as weakness?
Well, I think it's a weakness. Although it's not confirmed yet because they haven't said it, but I do think this is the last socket, right? So you are not going to be able to take the CPU or take this motherboard that you build a 13th gen system on and go to a 14th gen. Most likely. It's possible Intel breaks their pattern and you can do it. I think it's unlikely. So it's what a lot of people would consider a dead end socket. And that, for people who like to upgrade and go on in the same motherboard, same OS build, that's kind of a deal breaker. Most people never ever bother to upgrade a CPU in a motherboard, though.
But it's still a dead end either way.
It is still a dead end, and that is very much a negative.
Okay. Well, what other negatives?
It's actually slightly more expensive now. At launch, Intel actually had very competitive prices. In fact, everybody thought they were going to increase all of the prices. They only increased it on the Core i5, but the Core i7, Core i9 actually stayed the same versus the previous parts. In reality, on the street, it's a little pricey. You're looking at $589 as of this date, but again, it hasn't been out that long.
Yeah.
And the prices only get better. And honestly, for the performance you're getting out of a Core i7 or Core i9, it's not horrible, but it is still somewhat pricier than you would expect.
It's interesting. Very interesting. Definitely the tables have turned since the launch.
Yep.
So, okay. What other weaknesses?
I would say a weakness is worse power consumption under all core loads. I do want to point out in most things that people do, it's actually not that bad. In fact, it generally has pretty good idle performance against Ryzen. But if you're going to sit there and you're going to hammer every single core in these CPUs, it's on a slightly larger process than AMD. It's just going to use more power. It's just not competitive with Ryzen at all, which honestly isn't as good as Ryzen 5000, but compared to Ryzen 7000, 13 Gen is definitely a power hog if you're going to use all those CPUs.
Okay, all right. Any other weaknesses on the Intel side that you perceive?
Well, there's no AVX 512, which is kind of a negative because that's something Intel has talked about being like, oh, we support AVX 512. We have to. They had it in the original 12th gen and then they turned it off. 13 gen just doesn't have it at all.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's move over to the AMD side. What are the strengths that you perceive for the AMD side?
Well, I think its biggest strength, and this is something AMD has really played up really well. You saw this under AM4. It was just like incredible. But the socket, AM5, is expected to last 2, maybe 3 or more generations.
Through 2025 plus?
Through 2025 plus. Yeah, that's what AMD says. So you could build a system with a Ryzen 7000 today, get to 2025. Whatever wonders AMD is selling at that point, buy that CPU and you will likely be able to drop it into that motherboard and have it work. And that is
pretty cool.
That is an amazing feature. And if you're into longevity and reusing parts and you just don't want to throw away your motherboard or reinstall your OS, that is a super big advantage for AMD. And they've had that and they've played it so very well. You have to give them a lot of credit for that.
For sure. What other strengths?
I would say generally at the high end, AMD has the advantage in all core loads. When you're looking at the 24 core i9 versus the 16 core Ryzen 9, 16 cores, but 32 threads. All of those 16 cores are performance cores. There are some things where the Core i9 will match it or slightly outperform Ryzen 9. But in a lot of things, AMD will just give you more performance under an all-core load. And I think that is that's quite a value. And you should know that because I like Core i9 13 Gen for the lightly threaded performance. But I like Ryzen 9 16 core for that all-core performance.
What's another strength?
Well, this can't be overlooked, but with AMD's upcoming Radeon 7000 series, you're probably going to get more performance when you pair it with an AMD CPU, which has SAM, right?
Yeah.
So that AMD plus AMD generally gives you better performance versus an NVIDIA GPU with AMD or an AMD CPU with an Intel CPU. So it's a plus that I think should be considered. But again, that means you got to buy AMD CPU and AMD GPU.
Yeah. What are the strengths?
I would say actually at launch, pricing on Ryzen was kind of a miss. It was it did. I think they expected Intel to lower prices. Intel didn't, and Ryzen was left looking actually like it was higher price. Again, launch price of $699 versus Intel's launch price of $589. Yeah, sure, Core i9 is $627, but it just wasn't a great look. AMD has had unofficial price cuts. I don't know how permanent they are. They've effectively said, well, these are just temporary, sales for the holidays. It may go on longer than we think. And the prices of Ryzen are extremely competitive now. You went from $699 to $573, and the worst one was probably that Ryzen 5 7600, which was $300. It's now $249. So the prices are actually very, very competitive in many ways. I mean, it made it really hard to swallow for those prices, especially after Intel launched prices, especially when you consider the multi-thread performance on Intel's, i5, i7 parts versus the Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7. So the price cuts really, really made AMD a lot more attractive, I'd say.
Yeah, there's the price cuts on the parts themselves, but also we did see, in certain retailers like Micro Center that were bundling free DDR5 RAM.
Right.
So that's an even better deal than the straight up price cuts too. So yeah, there are ways, that the pricing has gotten much, much better on the AMD side. Any other strengths?
Well, AVX 512 was probably the last one. And of course, again, AVX 512 is something Intel first released with Skylake X 5 years ago. They've had it on a lot of CPUs. They have publicly said we have to support AVX 512 everywhere because if we don't, we will be letting our customers down. Well, they let their customers down with the 12th gen and 13th gen. And in fact, AMD is now supporting AVX 512 on the Ryzen parts.
Whoops.
I've seen arguments saying that it isn't quite as good as some of them, or whatever. It's there now, and there's nothing on 13th gen. So
bigger bar better on the AMD.
there is something to be said for that for applications that will get a boost out of AVX.
Okay. Well, what about the weaknesses of the AMD platform?
Well, I would say the biggest weakness for AMD is in sort of like low end losses and multi-threading is really bad, especially when you're looking at Core i5. Yes, it is pricier, but 14-core Core i5 versus 6-core Ryzen 5 7600, it's just simply a beatdown. And it's what you expect when you're putting 14 cores, even though some of them are efficiency cores, up against six cores. It's no fun there, and it's not great if you're looking for a lot of multi-threaded performance for on the cheap. Intel is just giving you that, whereas Ryzen 5 is makes it really hard to swallow.
Okay, all right. What other weaknesses?
Well, even at the mid-range parts, again, I haven't fully rolled out my mid-range i7 Ryzen 7 testing yet, but I can tell you the performance I've already seen reported. Core i7 running right there with the 12-core Ryzen 9, and generally somewhat outperforms the Ryzen 7 7700X, which that's not great because you basically have one Intel mid-range part competing with two AMD parts, one of them arguably a higher end part at $439. So in fact, I guess that's why we sort of see this somewhat price parity. Core i7 13700K can run with the Ryzen 9 7600 in some things, and $429 for Intel, $439 for the Ryzen 9. So that's why the prices are so similar. But of course, you think the real bad news there is you look at Ryzen 7 7700X, it's $348. So generally the vendors will price them to compete, and Intel has just got that advantage in the mid-range there.
Okay, all right. Any more weaknesses on the AMD side?
Well, Thunderbolt 4 is more rare. USB 4 is also very rare as well. In fact, the USB 4 implementation does not support Thunderbolt. And the last one I think is motherboard pricing. It has gotten a lot better. Originally, when Ryzen 7000 launched, it was launched with very expensive motherboards, high-end boards, $500, $600, $800. We now have the cost-effective AMD boards finally getting out there, but you're still, they're still not as cheap. You still have to fight